Hello and welcome to this Automation Academy Mastering the Machine webinar for the 7th of February 2025. Our topic today was old school systems integration, the down and dirty of how you do it in older plants with legacy equipment rather than Industry 4.0 techniques that are common today. Had some good participation and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. Good morning, folks, and welcome to this, the 83rd Mastering the Machine webinar for the 7th of February 2025. And this is sponsored by Automation Consulting and IO Central. And today's topic is kind of on a systems integration topic. Basically, I've been doing more systems integration lately. I think a lot of folks know me for training and content creation and that sort of thing. But due to a kind of a change in contracts, I have been doing a lot more hands-on work lately. And in particular, I have an old customer I've been working with for about 10 or 11 years down in Miami, Florida. And I decided to make today's topic, I've actually covered ABD before, American Beverage Depot, but today's topic is kind of to address a lot of folks who are doing the Industry 4.0 stuff and some very high-tech things. I followed a little bit of the 4.0 Solutions and Prove It conference stuff, and they're all working on lots of fancy new techniques and cutting edge things. And I want to talk a little bit today about some old school systems integration, which is, of course, I'm an old guy, so I do old school stuff, right? In addition to learning some of this new stuff so I can teach it. But this particular plant is I would call it a legacy plant established in about 2003. And I'll be giving a little more of the history of that plant. You know, they started out with stuff like the old Slick platform, Siemens S7 400s and 300s. So things that were really from the 90s and 80s. And I've been part of bringing them up into newer equipment. But they're always fighting kind of all this legacy stuff and just fighting fires and making sure that they can create products. So before we get into that, do a little bit of the bill paying stuff here. What is the Automation Academy? This is an online platform with lots of training videos, and there's a library of training and technical documents, some software on there. We do have a community with interest groups. That's IO Central. That can be joined for free, but the Automation Academy itself is subscription based. And you can find all that up here at automationllc.com, or there's links to it on the Automation Primer. And this webinar is named after a document I put out probably 10 years ago, or maybe a little more now, called Mastering the Machine. And it is a 26-page document on machine building and documenting, really meant for people that work in plants and buy capital equipment. And it talks a lot about how do machine builders quote all that stuff. So you get a little of an inside view there. So that's a little bit about the Automation Academy itself. And that's kind of why I do these webinars. And another thing that I like to mention in concert with the Automation Academy is that a lot of platforms do PLC training. And I've been doing in-person PLC training for about 12 years now. And it's not just about PLCs, right? So this systems integration stuff, there's a lot more that you need to know. So when you start out in high school, you learn the reading, writing, arithmetic, things like that. If you're lucky, maybe you do a little bit of advanced schooling, physics and chemistry. And then when you get into college, you learn a little more, maybe get your degree, maybe get a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, if you're lucky. And then you get into the real world. And the real world includes a lot of the topics on the upper levels of this pyramid, right? Motion control, machine vision, computers, and then maybe you get into PLCs. But before you do PLCs, you need to know things like numbering systems. You need to know what digital and analog are. And they may show you some of these things in your classes, but there's a lot more to it. And then when you get to the upper levels of this, and this is where the Industry 4.0 stuff comes in, you learn a little bit of IIoT. You definitely get into a lot more IT and networking. ERP and MES. You know, I attended a webinar just a couple days ago with Vlad and Dave Griffith, if you know those guys. And that's a lot of what they talked about. They talked about ERP and MES and, you know, plant level, enterprise level data, databases. And I certainly do have to work with that stuff sometimes. But a lot of what I'm doing is down here, I would say halfway down this pyramid, right? It is PLCs. It is a little bit of process control, certainly electricity and electronics, system design. That's a lot of what I do. So moving right along, this is La Planta. Okay, La Planta is the reason I put it that way is that there are probably 4 to 6 people in this entire plant that speak English to any great degree. So it was started by an Argentinian guy who moved up here in 2003, and he bought at the time what was probably cutting edge for Argentina. But, you know, like for instance, in the US, Alan Bradley had already come out with ControlLogix in about 1998, and they still had a SLC, right? They had a SLC 500 running this system that you see up here. So this is their batching system, and it had 4 tanks at that time. Had a couple fructose tanks outside, had these 2 dissoluter rooms where they'd mix all the powders and juice and stuff like that. And then they'd pump it through those tanks. And I think they maybe only had 1 line, 1 or 2 of these lines, the TBA 19 lines. These are, believe it or not, GE 9030s. So these are really old equipment. The communications with them at the time was serial. And we learned the hard way what happens when you hammer the serial port to try to bring in data. It got real slow, and it would actually stop the processor because they had a little watchdog in there. And we kind of learned that on the fly. But anyway, this stuff's pretty old. The blower that you see up here, for instance, is an S7 400, which is pretty Cadillac for Siemens at the time. It was for process control. It's a very high-speed filler from that era, end of the 90s, early 2000s. But nowadays, there's stuff that runs a whole lot faster and has a lot more technology to it. So that's what I've been dealing with since about, I think I first went out there in 2013. And I slowly learned the equipment. If there's anybody that is wanting to establish a good relationship with a plant, I will tell you it takes a long time to get to know everything in a plant. When I first showed up here, I didn't know a lot about beverage processing. I'd worked in industry for probably even 20 years at that time, but never really dealt with a lot of, you know, I dealt with food processing, not so much beverage processing, other than a little bit of material handling. So I've actually created most of this documentation. They didn't have it, right? They just had a plant with a lot of old equipment, and the father had recently turned the operations over to his son and his daughter. And I met the owner of the plant through teaching PLC classes, and I taught him, you know, SLC 500 stuff because he wanted to be able to get in and learn how the syrup batching worked, and he wanted to make some changes. And so I went out there first, and I did, you know, device net troubleshooting, which was very basic. I had RS Networks on my computer, went out there, troubleshot some sensors, learned a little more about the system. And then when they decided to add 2 more tanks, they said, Frank, can you come out here and do the programming for these 2 new tanks? And that's where I discovered that, for instance, that SLC would not hold the programs. It was already probably 90% usage, and we had to add 2 more tanks, and it wouldn't hold the 2 tanks worth of code. So I slowly upgraded them. I put in a CompactLogix, and at the time they had to have the software for that. Put the CompactLogix in and put Ethernet IO on it, which for them at that time was pretty cutting edge. They still had DeviceNet. They were struggling with that. So at the time, that was a big jump, and they had to get the software for it and everything. But of course, they left all these old 400s and things like that. So this little outline, this is not everything in the plant, but this is kind of what has happened since I'd say 2016, where we put everything on Ethernet, and then we put ignition in the plant. And when we started out with ignition, all we did was replace RS View 32, which was, again, a legacy old platform. That was what SCADA was in the 90s, in addition to Wonderware and Involution and all that stuff. But upgraded that, and the owner bought ignition, right, an ignition platform. And he learned it himself. He certainly is a lot better than I am on the database end. He learned how to bring all the databases in. And remember, before that, they didn't even have a server. They didn't have computers other than in their office, a couple computers. And so they kind of upgraded to that point. So that's been in there maybe 8 years at this point. So that's kind of what La Planta looks like. And as I mentioned, the reason I call it that is there are about between 70 and 100 employees there, of which maybe 6 speak English. So I have to use my very poor Spanish, and they have to use their English, and we all get along real good and show each other pictures and all that kind of things. That's why I draw a lot of pictures, right? So that they can get a hold of that. So what type of work is this old school integration? Well, it's everything from control panel building. And my wife was actually the person who went in and put their first 2-door new system in back about 8 years ago. She came down there to Miami with me, and we built a nice big 2-door cabinet for all that expansion work. We had to put the Compact Logics in and some new drives, right? Lots of new drives and things like that. So we built that panel. That was the last wiring job she has ever done. She's retired now, but is very good at wiring control panels. They were shocked by the fact that this little Japanese lady that at the time was probably 60 years old was getting drills out and mounting everything to the panel. She mounted everything. She wired everything. She's done it for a long time, back from when we owned our own business, and was used to doing that kind of thing, and worked with Humberto, who still to this day speaks almost not a lick of English. He's from Cuba. He is an electronics genius. He can fix things with duct tape and soldering irons and whatever, and no schematics. He can take drives apart and make them work. He's a magic dude, but still has not managed to master English. So that's one of his things. So what are all these pictures here? This is kind of an interesting view of the plant. What I'm doing down there right now, you see these big spiral things. So these spirals they bought at auction. They buy almost all their stuff used if they can. And they are elevating their bottle feeds, which I think I have a picture of some of the bottles here. They're elevating this above the plant floor so that they can bring some of these conveyors and their tetra lines, which the tetra lines are these things. They're adding another tetra line, and they don't have enough room for it. So they're going to stretch that out, and they're going to put all this equipment partially under that line. So that gets kind of tricky, because when you send things up 30 feet in the air, you want to make sure that things don't build up here, right? Things can't get stuck. So we're doing things like something that's going to be brand new for them, putting a vision system up there. We're going to use Cognex. We're going to make sure that stuff is moving. I can look down the entire conveyor and make sure that things don't get backed up. If they do, then we want to stop, right? And you have to get up on a lift and figure out what went wrong. I don't see that as real likely up there, but I do see things getting stuck on these spirals if you don't meter them right. And they have a habit of things like in the shrink wrappers, all the bottles may get loose and not get wrapped, and then tumble around and may have to try to ride up those conveyors, and that would definitely cause a jam. So we're introducing a little high-tech stuff, right? Vision systems. I've been doing that for about 30 years. What else? I do these pasteurizers. So these pasteurizers, there were 3 of them. They were built in Argentina, and they were honestly they were built okay. They were not programmed well at all, and they were definitely not networked correctly. And this wire, I found this. You see this thing with the circle here? I found this the last time I was there. That is a bare copper to aluminum wire junction, and it is twisted together. There's not even a wire nut on it. And it was done within the last 6 years. And so I'm kind of surprised, and I am going to show the maintenance manager when I get there. I was going to show the owner, and it was suggested, don't bring Juan Pablo into this little stuff. He's it's not that he's not going to care, but he's going to start going investigating and maybe go fire people, and that's probably not necessary in the case in this case. So what other kind of stuff? So I had to go in here and I'm rewiring all of this Ethernet, right? The Ethernet, we've decided all plant level Ethernet wires will be green, and they knew that 4 years ago, and they ran these red wires and yellow wires and gray wires anyway. So there actually should be a couple of yellow wires in here. Those are local. They are on a different network. But all these have been replaced with green wires. So I took a picture of this before we were done. I ran all these wires, tried to get it all back in, got this piece of wireway back on. This piece would not fit. So that's the kind of thing that you run into when you're doing old school integration. You cannot always make things look pretty and shiny. This is the giant table that I work on in the IT office. So this is my messy little workstation. I took a picture last time. Things like this. Now, I went out to those spirals and I had all the spirals designed, and then I went out and looked at them, and I looked down at the bottom and there was all this fun air stuff, right? And I don't still to this day know exactly what it does. I think it has to do with tensioning the conveyors as they go up those spirals. And so I brought that to the maintenance manager's attention, and he said, well, we ran them and they ran fine without doing anything with this. And I was like, well, they may not run fine when you put 400 pounds worth of bottles on them and send them up the spiral. So we'll see what those do. But you have to anticipate that stuff long before you actually try to install it. We're going to have maybe 2 weeks to put this in, right? And maybe you can shut down during that time, and you have to move everything over. You have to get rid of the old stuff, test it all. So we're going to test it before it ever runs. This is offset of the main conveyors by about probably 4 feet. And right now we can run it all. There's 12 conveyors associated with this. And then there's another 3 or 4 that we're going to have to add in later. And we got to do all that within 2 weeks. So that's, again, pretty old school. So that's the type of work. Oh, I put this here. This is from Tim Wilburn. So those of you who know Tim Wilburn, he sells these. IP Explorer. And as far as I know, I heard a rumor that his wife actually had to do something with designing this and working with this vendor. But these are sold out of Tim Wilburn's TW Controls, and it's called an IP Explorer, and it has been very, very useful for this job. What you can do with it, you see here, it says read unknown. So one of the things that I did is I had no idea where all these cables went, and I hooked it up to this switch, and I would unplug certain cables and I would figure out what's downstream. So what is on this network, and did I get my network working correctly, right? So you can identify generally Allen Bradley type unknown things. And I did find a valve bank and something else on there. But for instance, I could not find any of the WineTech, and I will call them WineTech, even though that's not specifically what they are, Nikki, but they really are WineTech HMIs, and I could not see those because they're not Allen Bradley type devices, even though they're Ethernet IP. It would not see that kind of stuff, but it would see all the PLCs pretty well. So for instance, I could see a PLC downstream and then not see it with RS links all the way through the network. So not sure why that is. I will find out when I go back. But that's a lot of what I'm doing, is getting all these PLCs on the Ignition network so that I can give the guys in the control room capability of changing the touch screens remotely. That's one of my projects. This is another project. I'm also going to put 2 more tanks in at some point this year. That's a third project. And what else? There's several, right? Doing lots of data collection. So what do you need to do this stuff? Do you need lots of fancy software and fancy computers and things like that? I don't even need the software, because we have gotten to the point where all the software is on the server. I connect to the server, and I can even do that from my office here up in Nashville all the way down to Miami. I can drill in there and I can see a lot of the equipment in the plant and program it in real time. This is not something that I advise you to do if you are new to systems integration. If you can't see the equipment and you don't really know what you're doing, you can definitely break things. But I've been doing it a long time, not afraid to do things in real time. As long as it's not, probably anything that has to do with the physical movement of things, right? Unless it's offline physical movement. And then sometimes I'll run things off to the side and, implement some new drives, and then they can run them on the side. So, I put these in here because even though I have this little control room that I work in, I am going to have to go out to the plant floor this time, and I'm going to have to change addresses of some things and commission the new spiral conveyors so that they can run the test when I leave. And I needed a little table. And actually, I see Nikki's here, and I think she recommended some stuff and gave me a link to a little tripod-based thing that had a platform. And I think that would be awesome, but I didn't get it ordered. So this was something I used back in the 90s. I actually worked in a kitty litter factory for a while and had to program that. And I had a blanket down in this drawer. And I used to, when the giant sweeper would come by, right, which would raise a lot of dust, sweep all the kitty litter off the floor, I would put the blanket over myself and my computer and this little table, and I would sit there for about 3 minutes. And that was in Mississippi and California. Taft, California was another plant. And to keep the dust out of my computer, and it was, August in California and probably 100 degrees, non-temperature controlled plant. So I'd get all sweaty. I'd be dripping on the computer. And when I would throw that blanket off, of course, there's a little dust on there. It would turn into mud. So my keys got mud down in them from kitty litter. So that's another thing that happens when you do old school systems integration, right? What else do you need? You need software, and Ignition is, it's been around for 10 plus years, been around for a long time, and you can do some basic things with it, but you can also do some pretty cool advanced things with it. Lots of Rockwell Allen Bradley in there. Like I said, it was SLC 500 stuff originally in the batching system. So when we have added new equipment, we have generally added Allen Bradley. Even though there is GE in there, there's Siemens in there. The Allen Bradley stuff, since they already knew it, we've got the pasteurizers, if you notice, they were 1400s, right? Micrologics. And they work fine for pasteurizers. And you can put them online. You can bring them into Ignition. This little picture here is something that I generated, and I, believe it or not, I use PowerPoint for my graphics. It's fine. I just do screen captures and I send it to the guys and I say, this is the network we're going to use. Notice the green cables. So they know, please use green cables for these. Don't put red and green and blue, or, they've got red, blue, yellow, and gray. The red is supposed to be the camera system. They have a plant-wide camera system that, again, is all new, totally different network, probably 100 cameras on it, monitoring everything. So we're doing all this. We did this the last time I was there. We went in on a Saturday and ran all the cables, got everything running. And then I found out, and this is something else that you learn in old school integration, that this pasteurizer was actually reporting information for no reason to the batching system. It didn't use the information at all, but I will tell you, when I put it on a different network, they would go out there and there was a fault on it and they could not run CIP on pasteurizer 4. And it was because the guy had put it in there, said, oh, it's a fault. You can continue running, the process, but you can't change anything. So I've got to go back. I put it back on the other network. I actually merged the networks and let it keep reporting to the other PLC. But the fact is, it was not required. It didn't need that information in the batching system. So I'm going to just write it out of the program. I'm going to put it on Ignition, which is where it should have been reporting anyway, and then capture the information I need to capture. But this is what we did. We took it off of the 57, what we call the 58 network, and we put it on the 57 network. The 58 network is one of those non-green networks that was just I/O. You do not want to mix your I/O, which is reporting at, say, 10 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds, with your Ignition stuff, which is transferring large quantities of data much slower, right? Once per second, maybe once every half a second. So that's one of the things that you have to keep your eyes on too. So these are the tools that I use, right? I use a lot of PowerPoint for graphics. I use Excel for Excel is my best friend, right? I create big tables of lots and lots of stuff and use it to communicate with people. I even can use Excel to grab tags if necessary, can create a DDE link to my PLC and grab data and just sit there in the office and look at it before I put it on Ignition. Software, obviously, Rockwell Allen Bradley. We've got a bunch of Siemens. We've got the WineTech Easy Builder software. We use that to remotely change the touchscreens and things. I use AutoCAD. Yes, old school, non-electrical AutoCAD. I've done that since the 90s. Never seen a reason to have to use AutoCAD electrical. For one thing, it's extra work to have to put all those page links and things on there. I just do it all manually. So yes, I am old school. So the Microsoft Office suites, the old toolboxes, of course, a laptop, several laptops, and they do have a pretty good server with everything on it, virtual machines running lots of different software. And so I drill into that. What is this not? Okay, that's something I wanted to address because I've kind of chimed in on LinkedIn on a few different topics on the newer stuff. What is it not? It is not this, okay? This is awesome stuff, and I attended a little webinar from the Manufacturing Hub the other day. Vlad was on there. I don't know if he's here or not. I see that there's more people that I can see on my little thing. Oh, I do see Vlad. Look at that. So this is not this, right? This is not Industry 4.0. The guys there, including the most important person who is the owner of the plant, Juan Pablo. Juan Pablo and I are buddies. He knows what this stuff is, and he wants to learn it. But the reality of putting this kind of stuff in is that, yes, we will probably put MQTT on here. Why? Because, and I think I put this is an old drawing. You see this up here. So the reason we may have to do this, one, I'm going to put a plug in for OT Skatacon here, okay? OT Skatacon last year, there's a guy named Chris Mistour, and he was at OT Skatacon, and he's Mr. IoT, I believe. That's his title. And he gave away a bunch of sharks, and the sharks are little MQTT sensor transmitters, and they're worth several $100s. And he gave these things away without the photo eye, it's several $100s. So just the device itself. So you might think, well, that's pretty expensive to just put one photo eye on the network. Well, this red line here does not exist yet. And I mentioned earlier some of the problems that I had when you have GE 9030s and you got to get data out of them. You cannot just go in there and poke into the 9030 and grab its data because it interrupts the serial port, and there is code in there that detects. It's like a watchdog code that says something, you're putting too much information through the serial port. It slows down the scan of the PLC. Who would have thunk it, right? So we tried that early on to bring all this GE stuff onto what's now connected to Ignition. So all this stuff up here represents Ignition, right? Ignition's there. It's connected to all the PLCs that I really need, but I need data from every one of these points. And that's what this drawing is. This was the stuff that I want to collect data from, and I've got all the batching stuff. We're in great shape there. I've got these palletizers at the end, so I know how many pallets they make. Shipping and receiving is on here. We've done like the ERP and the MES. A lot of this stuff is built into Ignition. Why? They build their own stuff, right? They're not going to buy big fancy software because they honestly don't have the money. This is a very small niche plant. They shockingly just bought a new shrink wrapper, where is that? That's up here, this shrink wrap oven. They bought something that has B&R on it, right? B&R PLCs. And the only thing I know about B&R PLCs, if people have warned me that they can get complicated. I'm hoping that it's complicated because it's code assist, because I'm pretty good with that stuff. But Yep, Nikki's shaking her head no. Okay, well, it is not a code assist oriented thing. I'm going to probably go to the training. The only reason that he bought this was because they gave him free training and it was less expensive than either the Siemens version or the Modicon version. I warned him away from Modicon. I said, you don't have anything in this plant that's Modicon. I said, if you do Siemens, I'm pretty good at that. I can do it and you don't need to go to training. But apparently it was still $50,000 extra to get the Siemens version of this. So he paid $500,000 or more for this thing. That's a big expense for a little plant like that. And we have to bring it online, right? We've got right now an old PCS7 running this thing, connected to Control Techniques drives and doing all the control in that. So we had all that data. Now we got to replace it with the B&R stuff. And we don't even know what to expect. But anyway, so this represents ignition. This represents all the stuff we want to bring in. MQTT, I may have to use this. And part of the reason is I'm going to probably need to put things like those sharks out on the line to transmit the data. It's either that or they'll have to run electrical signals to all the photo eyes where I want to put them, or we would have to bring the photo eyes into some of these stations, which are not online yet. And I've been waiting 3 years for them to run the wires to all the sensors. They just don't get to it. If I contracted somebody and did it, it would get done. But they're too busy fighting fires, right? That's what this plant does. They just keep running. Amazingly, they do have a lot of data on the shipping and receiving built in. They built their own what is it? MR whatever. This stuff. ERP, MES. They built their own MES. So they have a pretty good Spanish language MES built in the way they want it. ERP, hard to say, but like I said, shipping and receiving is in there. They scan pallets now with tablets, bring it into perspective and ignition, do a pretty good job on that, all homegrown stuff. But yeah, we may need this. Now, the question is, do we need it in the cloud? I don't think so. I am not a fan of putting everything up in the cloud if you're a single plant. I really don't get it other than cloud analytics. Sure. But we'll be able to generate our own analytics, right? We've got a guy who's just been doing it with Excel for years. You can do a lot of that. I don't think we're going to need any AI stuff. I know a little bit of Node-RED. I can probably handle that. Where I'm weak, I don't know anything really about MQTT. I'm still fighting that. Got stuff behind me that has MQTT capability. I haven't been able to get a straight answer. Can I make one of those a broker, right? Or do I have to use something like this HiveMQ? And I certainly don't want to use this in the cloud. It would just be on the server somewhere, right? That's kind of the architecture they've got. They don't really need the cloud. As a matter of fact, their internet goes out regularly. So, and it's just another weak spot. So I think this stuff's really cool. I've been trying to learn it for years, following Walker Reynolds stuff. Would have loved to attend the Prove It, conference and everything. Unfortunately, I'm having to work, right? Having to get a lot of this stuff done. So it is not this. It is, right? It is this stuff. This is what I'm using. So at this point, this is kind of the end of my presentation. I know there's some folks on here. I would love to hear other folks. Let's see, I even got some chat things. Worked on vision systems up high. This gets tiring to be on the ladder. Well, I won't be using a ladder. They got a cool lift. She makes them all. Okay, not sure what that's in reference to. Gypsum plants. Okay, gypsum plants are full of mud too. And probably missed this in the very beginning. What products does this plant produce exactly? They make bottled water, bottled soda, bottled juice, and box juice. And I don't have any picture of the box juices here. But what's interesting about this is there's something called a Tetra Pak. You've probably seen the little kids' box juices, Adam and Eve. They are an Adam and Eve packager, for instance. And they contract a manufacturer box juice for other people, and they also have their own products called Goliath. And Goliath, everything Goliath comes from here. It's mostly sold in the Caribbean and in Florida, but this is a kind of a franchise thing. So if you buy Tetra Pak equipment, Tetra Pak will make sure that they do not put more than one Tetra Pak plant in a geographical area. So they have like the franchise for Miami, and they're not going to let somebody else put a Tetra Pak plant. So the only advantage they've got over companies like Aquafina and Niagara and Nestle, who also have water plants in the area, is that, right? That they can do the box juice. And there's a lot of tricks to that. I've learned a lot about the paper that it takes to make that stuff, and how bacteria gets into that even past the pasteurizers, right? If you get bad paper, and it had a little contamination, it can make an entire pallet full of those box juices swell up and explode. So you don't want bacteria in your juice, right? So lots of tricks. They did recently get SQF certified, which is a kind of a big deal in that industry. And so they're on their way to newer stuff. But anyway, that's what they make. Yes, they make bottled stuff. They have a big bottle blower, and they blow bottles, and they fill it full of water and juice and soda. And then they also make the box juice. That is their product. And any other questions, comments? 18 new messages. My gosh. Yes, Box is the Tetra Pak. The company is called Tetra Pak. And and Amber Wilburn makes all the IP Explorers, makes them herself, really, assembles them or whatever. Yeah, that is the coolest tool. It's super valuable. I'm going to use it again when I go down there. I told Jose, the IT guy that is also a very good friend of the owner, you get one of these things, and I want you to start mapping this plant, everything you can. And you better go down and also just count on the fact there's lots of stuff the IP Explorer is not seeing, but you'll get the PLCs, which is the big thing. Because we've done stuff like accidentally, I'm not there and they need a new IP address. I have a perfectly good Excel spreadsheet full of IP addresses. I say, use these, use one of the empty spots. And they're like, they just choose one. And they accidentally chose one that was one of the WineTech HMIs, and it stopped working, and because they had a PLC on the same address. So the PLC didn't work and the WineTech didn't work. And so now they know, right? And from now on, I think they will use that spreadsheet. But yeah, we're doing things the old school way. I did put it on Ignition, interestingly. So you can now click on a button and it brings up all the IP addresses, and you can add it right in Ignition, and you can see all your IP addresses. So Ignition's good for a lot of things. So anything else? Anybody got anything, any of their own stories about old school innovation? I see David here, and he certainly does some old school stuff. So Vlad's all into the cutting edge new stuff. Come on.
I have a different story, Frank, I guess, on very old equipment that I'm looking at. Happy to share, obviously, without sharing the customer name. So I traveled to a facility in Florida a couple of weeks ago, and it's a very large coffee plant. And long story short, they have a bunch of PLC2s, PLC5s, selects 503s to 505s, some on the network, some on Data Highway Plus, a lot of RSU32 type of equipment, very old load cells for various applications. So it's going to be a challenge, to be honest with you. And I see the same things, I guess, as you're describing, right? I think we like to talk new tech, but ultimately a lot of these plants are still on old equipment. I think that for a number of reasons, they obviously want to keep the equipment as long as possible. But at some point, it becomes very difficult to support. The people either leave the company or, the knowledge transfer just doesn't happen. So we're stuck in, quoting them, how do we modernize a lot of those racks? And it's quite an undertaking, right? When you have a PLC 5 talking to, 5 to 10 remote racks over Data Highway Plus, you need to be really careful how you're going to rip and replace those types of systems. The challenges they're facing, to be honest with you, it's not even about the protocols. It's not about data or AI. The challenge is that the guys are buying machines that can run Windows 2000 on, on a PC that runs some very old software for some of their batching stuff, right? That doesn't even run in PLCs. It's all on Windows servers and Windows machines. So it is a quite an undertaking. And again, even David knows, as you've mentioned, that the facilities I think are old in many ways, and I think we all like the new tech and we all like the data and the shiny stuff, but I think there's a lot of work on the plumbing side to even get to be able to leverage that data. That's at least like what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I'm at in this plant. The fortunate thing is, yes, they did put ignition in like, 8 years ago. The downside is there is another remote guy that did a lot of work there. He lives in New York now, but he was an employee there at one time. When he came here from Cuba, and he learned. I taught him his first PLC class, as a matter of fact. I don't even think he had it in college, and now he's an integrator. He's a pretty good integrator. But now he has his own company. He does remote support for this, but he's bidding new jobs. These folks aren't going to pay him as much as he can make on those new jobs. So how do he knows this equipment. So how do you support, right, the stuff that's in there? You can't hire new people. The owner here has gotten very wary about training people up because he's lost a lot of his guys. Once they're trained up, they go out and they're entrepreneurial and they go figure out that they can make a lot of money elsewhere. And yeah, so sounds a lot like what we're doing kind of here, what you described. I think there's a lot of folks that can help with that. So one of the things I love about our OT Skatacon group is the networking. People can say, hey, you know how to do some of this old stuff. You interested in a month's worth of work or 2 months worth of work or a lifetime's worth of work, right? I don't know.
That's
But
Oh
then
yeah.
the question is, can some of these older legacy plants pay for it? That's the issue.
Well, well, I think that they're seeing the same thing. I mean, we actually put in an ignition system recently because their 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 Honeywell station died, and so it's on Windows 7. So they went in and they rebuilt the Windows 7 machine, but the program wasn't there. There was no program. So they had to go through Honeywell's process to get the software. They eventually got the software, and then I was like, well, we can do this. And then they brought me in. After they did all that, they were like, hey, we need help. Can you program this machine? I was like, well, we can do that, but the labor to do this and station on a Windows 7 PC and the labor to build it in Ignition are exactly the same because we're building screens, we're building trend charts, faceplates. So if you upgrade to Ignition, then you can actually tie in your entire plant because they have 4 different PLC brands in there. They've got a Siemens, they've got Allen Bradley, they've got Honeywell, they've got some Modicons. It's like if you do Ignition, now you can bring your whole plant into one computer server and get the data versus having your front end preheat furnace.
Sounds
There you
very
go.
familiar. So yeah, the more I look
Absolutely.
into it, I'm finding a lot of folks doing more or less the same thing I am with more or less, right? Capability or whatever. Vlad, what you were talking about with the
Hmm.
504s and the old PLC2s. I mean, PLC2s, I will say they may run for another 20 years, right? And there's not
mhm.
much of a program in there. PLC2 didn't have a ton of memory, right?
Which is why they'll run for another 20 years, as long as you keep the
That's
cabinet clean.
that's another issue, right? They also have a problem with the memory on those PLCs because they're passing some batch parameters. So they've actually got Visual Basic inside of HMIs passing tags and data along. So it's again, like I said, it is a challenge, right? But I think to David's point, you stand up some system that's going to be on top. For us, it's going to be mostly on the Rockwell side. They're looking at Ignition, but ultimately, how that can be on the customer. They can lean onto Factory Talk USC, and for now, that's the platform of choice. But ultimately, you stand that up and you start just tackling small areas of the plant, right? You cannot, like I said, rip and replace the entire process or packaging side. So you need to pick areas. So that's kind of where we're at. We're negotiating what makes sense, what are the oldest areas, but also what makes sense from a business standpoint, right? And they need to kind of make that decision and help the integrator understand, well, this line always runs, so maybe there's only downtime in the summer, but at the same time, it's the most utilized line and it's the oldest line, so maybe that makes sense to put capital in. So, anyways, there's a lot of discussions, but again, I think it's important to split the items, and then stand up a overhead system that will make sense a bit more long term, because RS-232 is, let's be honest, a little bit obsolete. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting project, but certainly a lot of challenges. Again, nothing on Industry 4.0 or IoT side, just very standard, I want to say, integration, conversion, making sure everything runs right, a lot of commissioning, right? A lot of on-site work and presence as well, making sure, like I said, the tags are passed correctly. There's multiple vendors pulling from those PLCs as well, so just being very careful on how it's done.
One of my questions on your webinar, Vlad, was when you have a plant like this, and it was hard to word it because I'm typing.
Yep.
If you wanted to make sure that when they do get to the 4.0 solutions type thing, the true unified namespace, everything in one place, right? Using the same information and not fragmenting it. So what I meant by that was, like, even in Ignition, we have pretty much everything is in Ignition, but the guy from New York comes in and he makes David's faceplates and he makes David's tags, and it's like, that's not the way to do it. And I can tell him that. And so we'll put your faceplates and your UDTs and your stuff in a global thing. But at some point, it needs to be cohesive. And I understood their point about putting everything on a database through MQTT that is in one single location. At some point, when they want to do that, how do you make sure on the lower level that you're not fragmenting that everybody's not doing their own thing? Do you just write a specification?
Look, again, I don't have I guess, a one size fits all answer for that, right? You said it correctly. You write a specification, but a lot of times it's a negotiation with the vendors, with the systems integrators, right? You can give that document to them and they'll say, well, no, we have our own standards. We're going to do it however we do it. And it's a back and forth, right? At the end of the day, David has his set of standards or ways of doing things, and he may agree or disagree to that plant's document. Hopefully he agrees and, converts some of his stuff and ties it in, but it's a discussion.
Right. And it's a balance too, because if you select a vendor who has, say, this vendor does only Rockwell for their system, and then you ask them to do a Siemens for their system, now they're reinventing their wheel into a Siemens process. They'll do it. I mean, most vendors will do it for a price, for sure. But then it's a balance, because do you really want them reprogramming their system into a Siemens when they know that their system works? They've got 100 of them out in the field. They know it works, and then now they're going to do model number 1 for you.
And then they have the option to get a Siemens. You advise them to get a Siemens, but they buy a B&R, which is the only B&R they'll have in the plant.
Yeah, and that's where Ignition comes into play, and that's because it's so agnostic, where it can talk across those platforms, and that's really helped, because especially as these systems become more just Ethernet IP, just Ethernet based communications. You're not communicating off of a DH1 COM port. It makes it a lot easier when you can just plug them all in, and now you're just doing some translating between MQTT or Ethernet IP, Modbus IP. As long as it's all Ethernet corded based, then you can at least do that translation somewhere.
Yeah. A quick comment here. Somebody asked, is MQTT a message broker or something else? Sorry, probably a super beginner question. Not a super beginner question. I have not implemented MQTT yet. However, what it basically is, it is a text-based, and that was the thing that kind of messed with me. You get your results, say, instead of just a 1 or a 0 from a sensor, you're going to get a bunch of information about, like, when that sensor switched, and you're going to get a text base, it's on, it's off, that sort of thing. It's considered to be a lighter protocol than, for instance, OPC UA, which, there's a lot of arguments online about, well, OPC UA is too heavy and we're transferring a whole lot of extra header information over that, and MQTT's lighter, etc. But what I'm finding is, well, not everything is native MQTT, and you still have to have that broker. And the broker is apparently a software piece that maybe lives on the server and is just an extra thing. Yet, as I showed in this image, there's a point at which to get that information into here, this may be the only option. You collect things as needed. And I just have a hard time wrapping my head around taking this giant ball of information that I don't need all of it. I just need to strip out, is it a 1 or a 0? And I also need to do it pretty quick, right? I'm counting things and it needs to go 1 0 1 0 and at least count packages that are moving at a fairly high rate. So you're still probably having to put something down in there in the higher speed category to count things and then report that count via MQTT. Well, at that point, you've put another device down there that had to be powered on the line. You might as well have just put a wireless sensor on there, that hopefully is fast and can communicate to whatever your data collector. I've got a data collector PLC. I've got a L73 processor with Ethernet IP, and I can pick up anything, but I can't get them to run the cables, and buy the point IO or whatever to put on the line. That's the issue. And I'm gonna maybe just say, look, I'll go hire contractors. I'll get all this stuff run. And they may or may not go for that, because you're climbing all over equipment and they run 24 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. When can you do it, etc. So yeah, it's an adventure. And WineTech okay, Nikki's saying WineTech HMI can be an MQTT broker. Really? A broker? That would be cool.
So you should be able to run a broker on any Linux machine in general, right? So if the HMI can have like applications loaded onto it, I don't see why not. Right.
I will have to caveat that with not all the models and not the older models. So we have the standard and advanced models, and the advanced ones have the advanced OPC UA and MQTT functionalities. And if it's okay, I'll just answer David Turner's question also. I think the cheapest, so you can get a WinTech headless HMI for like a couple $100. Maybe two. I haven't memorized the price list yet, so don't quote me on this pricing. But you can use the headless HMI if you don't need, an actual screen. In this case, if you just want to use, a lot of people actually buy them as protocol gateways, the headless ones, because you're not limited to a 1-to-1, conversion in the gateway. You can actually, as long as you can get a connection into it via either remote IO or via the Ethernet, or the Modbus, like that Ethernet plug, right? You can do as many protocol conversions as you want within the WinTech HMI. There's no limit to how many multiple to multiple conversions you can do in there. Whereas some other like HMIs that do provide that, they'll limit you at like 15, or, or you have to buy a protocol conversion gateway that is literally flashed to only convert one protocol to another. So I thought that was interesting. I actually found a comment on Reddit from like a long time ago. Somebody says that they never even use WinTech HMIs, but they use a ton of them for protocol conversions, which is not the primary use case, but hey, if it works, it's
and there's
nice
a protocol converter $700, I think, from RTA and some of these other folks. So if you can put an HMI in there that also gives you basically some information and you can interface with, why not? My gosh.
You could do it either with the actual screen HMIs or the headless HMIs. Just the headless going to be a little bit cheaper if you have no reason to put a new screen on, or a screen. But it's pretty cool. And RTA, not saying anything bad about them, but I did talk to them a while back about back when I was at QuoteBeam. And they were like, oh yeah, we stock all the product, but what we do is when somebody orders, we flash the firmware on there that limits what protocols you can. So like the part numbers, they're really all the same hardware, but the part numbers are based on what firmware they flash onto that hardware to tell you like which protocols you can actually go in and out from that appliance.
Wow. I'm going to have to definitely follow up with you on that. We have a lot of protocol conversion needs and headless.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, cheap. Yeah, you may be at half the price of a RTA.
Yeah, and we're actually also releasing, and this is not public. We haven't done a public release yet, and I don't know the pricing, but we're about to release web panels, which I think makes me very happy for all my Ignition friends. That
Yes.
maybe we can still do business, even though if you're heavily on Ignition and you want to do your own stuff, you
What's
can
a
at
web
least.
panel?
A web panel is like an HMI that you can just run a web browser in. So you don't have to use the HMI software necessarily. You can either run your own web-based HMI, or you can have, the Easy Builder Pro HMI, and then also have any other applications that you want that are just accessible through the web. So it's got a
Oh,
Chromium.
Wait, so that's
Yeah,
that's
browser.
to
so it's
design
like-
the screens, or that's to access the HMI to see what's on the HMI?
Wait. So you can
Also-
like run an Ignition application on the screen itself and not even be using.
a client.
Perspective. Yeah, you can run it in perspective just like you do on your phone.
Yeah. But Vlad, I guess to answer your question, to view the HMI we have our own app where you can view the HMI via any, like our app or just a VNC viewer app, if you're on the local network. But then we also have a WinCloud thing, which if somebody did want to do some more basic, like SCADA-like functions and if they don't have Ignition, for instance, and they just want to get a little bit more of a SCADA-like functionality, that is actually a software that comes from Wintech that, again, used to be a subscription. It was like $300 a year. They've changed it now. We have no subscriptions of any kind for anything. So it's a one-time fee, and then you get it. It's up to like 100 tags. You can historize for a year, so you get a historian in there. It's got a lot of like pretty cool stuff at a very, very low price, right? And you don't have to keep paying that subscription fee.
And I think you can
or
plug a
whatever.
USB
Gotcha.
stick in also and log to that, right?
Yeah, so it's got, I think usually they have USB 2 and a couple of Ethernet ports on all of them.
Wow.
The older ones, so they've got the USB-C like connector now, the new ones. But the older ones, I'm guessing, have the older style USB.
So, Vlad, what protocol conversions are you using? I'm not doing any in this plant. I don't need to. I've used RTA in the past for all kinds of things. I've gone to BACnet, for instance, to do building automation, Ethernet IP to BACnet. I've done, Modbus, certainly, from Modbus to Ethernet IP. I've done serial, DF1 to Ethernet IP, which, of course, Allen Bradley has a little box also that you can do the same kind of thing. But I used RTA a lot. I would say 10 plus years ago, that was kind of the go-to real-time automation. It was pretty cool stuff.
Yep.
I also use field servers. So ProSoft, they make field servers are little boxes that have the equivalent of an Excel spreadsheet inside of it. You come in on one side on one protocol, you map everything in the Excel spreadsheet to the other side, and it's bidirectional and pretty cool, easy to use. And again, that was a BACnet. It was a Siemens BACnet to Ethernet IP application, and you could drill into the field server. It was like a little computer sort of, and you could see that spreadsheet and remap things on the fly if you needed to. So, yeah.
Gotcha.
Man. Yep.
I was gonna say, like, it's interesting, right? To what Nikki is saying, like, I had the similar problem. If you want to get MQTT out of some of this hardware, the reality is not all vendors support that. So you would need to go OPC UA to some kind of an IPC, and then that transfers to MQTT, right? And so in our instance, a lot of time it would be an IPC machine, I guess, like standing inside of that panel. But if it's on HMI, I guess it saves on the hardware and makes it a little bit easier. So looking at your architecture, I see that red dotted line to MQTT. I'm not sure what device that comes out of on the like facilities. Like, what is that a server that you're pulling the MQTT stuff from?
Yes. No, this is this device here.
Well, that's a
this
rack,
is the
yep.
intended data network, which this is a Allen Bradley PLC that's already reporting to Ignition, and the intent was to put this red stuff is not there yet, right? This was the
Okay,
stuff I'm
gotcha.
waiting for the wiring on. So the thought was on these GEs, I would bring it out of the GEs into MQTT using something. If what Nikki's saying,
Yeah.
and it's a broker, I could put that in between.
I may
here.
need to double check my terminology of the broker because I may be using that incorrectly. But I know you can use it as like you can take information in from anything into the HMI and then bring that out via MQTT. But I think maybe
think
the
that's what you
terminology
need,
of a
Frank.
broker is more
Yes.
at the cloud level. So I may be misstating that. But I
Yeah,
think
and what
based
I
on
could see, I
what
could
you're
see
looking to
putting
do is get
one of them in
information
this
out of those
room.
PLCs and then pass it via MQTT up somewhere. I
Yes.
believe that that's what the HMI could do.
Wow. And the stuff behind me, like I've got a Codasys automation direct controller back there that says it's MQTT capable, and then I put I want to say Siemens does
Just put
that
the
too, I
Codasys
believe.
license
Yeah.
on the Wintec HMI. Don't even mess with that.
Yeah, this is
Use one of the
experimentation.
4 cores to run your Codasys and you get to go too. You don't need more extra stuff for that.
Yeah, that would be extra stuff. I have all these fun little trainers that I'm building up here, and nobody's given me a nice Wintec, little headless HMI that I could
Well, I
experiment
think we need
with.
to talk about that, Frank.
I love Wintec. I love Easy Builder. It's I've
Sorry,
gotten
and I
very
wouldn't be
used to it.
saying this stuff if I didn't think you were interested in it. I don't mean to come on your webinar and try to sell anything. I can't even sell anything to you guys if I wanted to. So
Yeah, I'm already familiar with the software, so that's a big plus. I've been using it down
yeah,
there. But that guy,
I just
he
find that
doesn't
most
buy
people
new
don't know
anything.
about all of these extra features.
Yeah,
They just,
absolutely.
really think of us as an HMI, which is what it is, right? And but it can do a lot more,
Yep.
which is pretty cool, especially in these cases where it's a challenge to get budget for extra stuff always. So the more you can consolidate, you don't need extra rack space, you don't need extra cabinet space, you don't need extra licensing fees, those sorts of things. They can really help.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, any last minute things? We're up against our hour here.
All right, this was a good time. Thanks
Yeah,
for
it
having
is.
us,
It's a
Frank.
lot of fun. I see a few other people lurking in there. Anybody who has anything to say, yeah, speak now or forever hold your pieces. So the next webinar, as far as I know, will be March 7th. This is a 28-day month. So I believe it's 28 days, right? Is this a leap year? No, it's 2025. So we're gonna, March 7th, I think Friday again. That seems to work because then I can get all this stuff together Saturday before usually traveling back out on Saturday. I don't know what the topic will be. Love to have guests. Nikki, if you're interested, I would do something on Wintec. Would love to. And if you, have some stuff to present, anything, even just showing videos of how they do some of that stuff and what you can use this for. Of course, I saw it at Automate, and they had the equivalent of little PLCs there. And there was a VP guy, maybe the guy you work for even, was there at Automate. And they had
So Keith Moyer is our VP of sales. I do not work for him. I work with him.
Okay.
I work for the CEO, Oscar Rojas.
Okay. Yes, it was Mr. Moyer there. So that's who I
and
saw there.
he's a great resource. He's been with Wintec like 7 years, so he knows everything. He's a great guy. I really appreciate him. I actually have to present I've come up with like my own Wintec presentation, and I have to present it later today. So I'm gonna be making sure I got my product knowledge down. But yeah, no, they're a really nice team, and they'll be at Automate this year as well. We're kind of putting our trade show eggs in that basket, and they have an educator forum and this kind of stuff too. And we're putting out a STEM kit with Arduino to try to get more into the education. And what I think is really cool there is that the software is already free, and there's a ton of simulation capability in the software actually. So students don't even have to buy or have access to an HMI to be able to really learn and simulate a PLC on it as well. I saw a professor post a really nice example of what their students were doing with it the other day. So
Easy Builder does a good online or offline simulation. You can either connect to the PLC and use that or do the offline stuff. And it looks pretty good. Good for, again, training and creating videos and that sort of thing. So
Yeah. What I have on my desk right now that I can show is one of our remote IO units that is an Ethernet unit with a bunch of it has some high density IO on it, and it's really inexpensive. It's like $330 for like 24. I'll have to. I really need to remember my specs better. But then I'm supposed to be getting a headless HMI as well. It's
Very
probably
cool.
on the way. So maybe I'll have those both at my desk that I can do some stuff with or show.
That would be way cool. Yeah. I mean, love to have guests on, and I think you've been on before at some point in the past. I'm not sure. I know Allie's been
I think
on.
I've only jumped on as a participant.
Okay.
I
Okay.
remember. No, the time that you did that we talked about OT SCADACon, I think is when you had us on. Yep.
Yep. So again, plug in for OT SCADACon July 23rd through the 25th. We will all be there, right? We'll all be there presenting mostly, but lots of attendees. And I think David's talking about doing the assembly show here in Nashville, and I may be sitting in his booth with him for that. Would love to do that. So yeah, all you guys will be seeing you, and catch everybody down the road.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Frank.
Bye-bye.